Senior Media and Communication Officer at Yaga, Amaza, joins us from our Abuja studio to discuss the security situation, roles of security personnel, and logistic challenges during the Edo State governorship election. Good afternoon. Good to have you on Arise News. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Now, let's start, with the performance of the security forces during the election on Saturday. What's your assessment of their performance?
Yeah, well, there were very minimal security incidents that happened during the election, and I agree with the DIG in regards to that good performance. There were still incidents that happened, particularly at collation centers, which we noted at least in one collation center where there was violence and an attack during the process towards midnight of Saturday, which caused a lot of pandemonium there. But unfortunately, his assessment that it led to a high turnout does not tally with the official turnout numbers released, not just by INEC, but also that falls within the estimates we have, because what we saw in the end was a decline in voter turnout from the 2020 elections this year. So, it's quite anecdotal evidence that he's using to say that the security cost motivated people to turn out, because we didn't see a high turnout in the election.
If anything, some people would say the security situation would have made less people turn out. But I want to talk about the logistics issues that have continued to plague our electoral processes and INEC. From the CSO's point of view and from your standpoint, what have you been hearing back?
Well, we keep seeing these logistical issues again and again. In elections, even in off-cycle elections across just one state, and it's rather disheartening that this keeps recurring. And the official reason is that INEC's arrangements with transport unions to ferry workers and electoral materials do not always materialize in the way they are planned. However, that excuse cannot keep being used, because we see that again, and there's no accountability. No one is held responsible for either is it a breach of contract on the transport union side, is it a lack of adequate arrangements on INEC's side, and it's the same process we keep using again and again with the same results. And what then happens is, even though with these elections we observed in polling units that we observed, everyone that was on the queue as at 2:30 p.m. was able to vote. Nonetheless, that late commencement of polls across polling units is a huge discouragement to the elections, to voter turnout. And it begs the question: if we had a higher voter turnout, then would we have had voters unable to register to vote, or what would the situation have been? Because with a small voter turnout, low voter turnout, we still had this kind of challenges. And it is something that INEC should really look into and resolve, especially before November when we go to the polls in Ondo State.
Well, there were also allegations, of overvoting in some polling units. And then, of course, there were allegations that some of the results announced did not tally with those on the IREV. Can you comment on those allegations?
Yes, so we have noted, at least in 3 local governments, where the results that were announced by INEC do not tally with our estimates or our observations in Oredo, Ego, and Eshan West local governments. And we have called on INEC, before we just put out our final post-election press statement about an hour ago, where we called on INEC to review those results in those local governments, and see, remove those that are inconsistent from the final tally. But then with these are, again, issues we keep seeing again and again. We saw that last off-cycle elections in Kogi State, and then we are seeing that again this time around, where we are seeing results, for example, that from polling units where there are either more persons that vote for a party of the final vote tally than persons that were accredited, or where at collation the numbers begin to change and are not consistent with what obtains at the polling unit level. INEC has the power to review results, and it should exercise that power as granted to it by the Electoral Act to review these results before making final result announcements.
And INEC has a full job on their hands, as we do know that the losing parties will more than certainly go to court to try and get some redress. And it might be a little bit hard getting those final voting forms, the voting tallies from INEC, as we saw a couple months back when the whole presidential fiasco happened. But let's talk about the IREV and the court cases and everything that will probably ensue after that. What do you make of how the losing parties have conducted themselves?
Well, it's a good thing that so far there's been calm in the wake of the announcement of the final results. And like you said, yes, they'll most likely go to court to seek redress. And while the courts exist to provide redress in the kind of situations, we also should, we shouldn't become such an entrenched practice that every elections become finally determined at the courts, because we have now turned the judiciary to be the one that actually installs persons in office rather than the votes of citizens like you and I. And that's why we need to have these kind of issues nipped in the bud, before the results are put out, and whether that's from the process of the elections to the elections management, the result management process, to the final, the tallying and all of that, so that we cannot keep going to the courts again and again for us to have clarity on who has won an election or not. Because it has now become such a thing that after elections, we now wait to see who the court will decide has won the election or not, which has reduced the power of citizens to elect their own governments. Yes, the losing parties have a limited time to put together their evidence and go to court if they choose to, which they likely will. However, we need to really look at our electoral process and have INEC and other stakeholders make those necessary changes so that the courts going to court will become more the exception than the norm.
Now, I'd like to take us back to the issue of security. There were allegations, especially from PDP quarters, that INEC colluded with security officials to alterate, the final results. Is there any backing to this from what you witnessed?
Well, what we can witness, we can only speak of what we have observed, our observers have reported. And like I mentioned earlier on, was regarding those 3 local governments where the results did not tally with our estimates. And across those 3 local governments, each of the 3 parties had results that did not fall within the range that was expected of them. That's from the APC, for the PDP, and the LP. If the PDP, it's very likely that the PDP feels so strongly that there's this collusion, and we don't hold brief for the PDP. So it's on them to explain that or to prove that. But for what we have seen, there has been especially those 3 local governments that we've highlighted, where the results that came out from those local governments for certain parties do not fall within the estimates that we expect for them.
And a bit of a personal question now from the current governor, the governor who just won, Monday Okpebolo. Remember, he said that he would bring insecurity to Edo State. We do know that it was a slip-up, but we also know that he missed a lot of interviews. We heard a lot from the other candidates, Olumide Akpata and the candidate from the PDP. But in your opinion, was this the outcome that you foresaw?
Our role is not to predict who will be the winner of an election. We are more focused on the process of the elections and to ensure that the elections are credible, and where credible are free, are fair, and fair. And where there's any deviation is to highlight those deviations from the laid down laws and to and recommend where needs to be improvement. So we do not have we can't say who we expect to win or not. Maybe in the coming days and weeks, we'll provide more details regarding that. But what we have so far is that the inconsistencies in the INEC results, there's a deviation from what I would expect for each party, particularly in certain parts of the state, which I have mentioned.
Well, okay, so I'd like us, to talk about the process, since you said that's what you want to focus on. And I'm wondering, how widespread was vote buying in this election in Edo State? And what measures do you think can be taken to curb such as we look forward to the elections in Ondo State?
One thing that was particularly unique about the vote buying in this election is that it didn't happen just on Elections Day. It started long before the Elections Day, which we highlighted in one of our pre-election observation reports, where we specifically named the PDP and the APC as being involved in inducing voters even before the election day. And there was still, instead of vote buying on election day. The one way to stop vote buying is to treat it as a crime that it is, and not just punish those who are engaging in the vote buying itself, but also those on whose behalf they are buying votes. Because without that, those who are beneficiaries of this vote buying as well as other electoral malpractice, if they are not punished, it does not send a strong signal to them and to others to not engage in those kind of practices or allow it to be done in their name or for their own benefits. Because those who are often seen at the polling units buying votes or committing other electoral malpractices are unfortunately cannon fodder and disposable to those who are either running the elections or and those closest to them. So we need to have laws that will punish, not just laws that will punish that, but also institutions that will take up the mantle of investigating, apprehending, and prosecuting those who are involved in such electoral malpractices. It's rather unfortunate that in the Ninth Assembly, an Electoral Officers Commission bill that would have created such an institution did not pass in the House of Representatives after passing the Senate, and has to be reintroduced in this 10th Assembly. And that's one of the recommendations for reforms that we strongly align ourselves with and we continue to push for.
And going forward with the court cases that will eventually ensue, how do you feel that the electoral process in general went down in Edo State this weekend?
It fell far below expected, far below standard, that I can say for sure. There's a huge gap between what we expect or what our electoral process should be and what it has been. And what it has done is that it further erodes confidence in our electoral process and by extension our democracy. And when we keep saying this, it's not to be alarmist, it's for all of us to take this very seriously and ensure that we have an electoral process that is free and fair and agreed by all to be so, and and seeks to involve all citizens within it, because that's the only way we can have a governance that delivers improved life for all of us. What has happened is it's the continuation of a downward slope, in my opinion, about how our electoral process continues to deteriorate. So for all stakeholders, for INEC, for political parties, for all of us, there's a lot of work on our hands to improve our electoral process. If not, what we keep seeing is that citizens will continue to be disenchanted, first of all, the electoral process, and by extension, the democratic system that we have.
Now, that's a very, heartbreaking assessment. And it makes me wonder if there were any lessons, learned from the conduct of the elections in Imo, in Kogi, even from the 2023 general elections, and talking about making improvements. What sort of improvements are you anticipating? And do you believe that this could start from the next election that will hold in Ondo State?
2 months is not a lot of time to make so much changes, especially in terms of changing the laws that guide our electoral process. However, the existing laws the laws that exist currently can be used to achieve better outcomes. So, for example, I mentioned earlier about INEC's power to review results before the elections from polling units and collation centers before the final tallies are announced. INEC needs to start exercising that power to review these results within the period of time it has given by the law, 7 days, so that we don't keep just announcing, having results announced, and then asking those who are aggrieved to go to court to challenge it. We also need to see better logistical preparation by INEC for the elections, and better training for its staff so that errors do not occur during the electoral process. But importantly also is for security agencies to be proactive in terms of ensuring that those who engage in electoral violence are and other malpractices are apprehended and seem to be apprehended and prosecuted, so that you can send a strong message to those who are, to politicians and parties, to not, that is not going to be allowed. These are things that can be done in the next 2 months before the Ondo State election.
And I feel like I'm having deja vu because with every election cycle, we have analysts that come on and they point out the same three issues that could be worked upon, and every election cycle, it's the same thing. What is it going to take for INEC to listen in and onboard some of these criticisms and make their process a little more seamless? It's not as though it hasn't been said time and time again. It doesn't seem like it's a resource issue. What do you think it will take in order to go past just the discussion of the issues and lessons learned to the actual implementation of these on the part of INEC?
I agree with you that it's not a resource issue. We saw in the Electoral Act 2022 the clause that provides for INEC to get funding for an election a year ahead, which was came into play for the 2023 general elections. So I think one of the reforms that needs to be done to INEC is also in terms of the quality of persons that run it, and that's one of the reasons. One of our recommendations for persons that get appointed to INEC, whether as chairman or national commissioners, should not just be what currently obtains, which is an age requirement, a person of unimpeachable integrity, and being non-partisan. But we need to also have subject matter experts that get into INEC. So, for example, we've been talking about logistics, which is a key component of electoral operations in Nigeria. We need to have persons that in INEC that understand logistics, that know how to run logistical operations. We need to have persons who are in charge of technology, that understand technology, and then also persons who understand the law, that are at the top of INEC, so that those kind of issues do not keep recurring. That is a very, very significant reform that needs to be done to INEC to stop this recurrence of issues like polling units not receiving materials on time, or IREF failing, and other recurring issues. This is just like on one of those recommendations we can make for INEC in particular that will go a long way to improving the quality of our elections.
Well, and just before we let you go, we know that the police have ordered enhanced deployment of their personnel in Edo State to forestall any possible post-election violence. I'm wondering, how necessary do you think this move is? And how confident are you that the police can actually maintain law and order without infringing on human rights?
Well, on one hand, it's a good move by the police to be proactive and begin to deploy more personnel to Ondo State. But on the other hand, they do not need to wait until there's that complete breakdown of law and order. Before it happens, you can track, or even predict it's happening. So, for example, for the Edo election, one of the things we noted in our pre-election observation reports was an increase in tension in the state based on the rhetoric of the politicians, where there's a lot of name calling, mudslinging, personality-based attacks, from between them and their supporters. When these things begin to happen, it's really important for the relevant government agencies to sound a note of caution to these parties and persons so that they can dial down or tone down the rhetoric, because if that's allowed to go unchecked, it will almost inevitably lead to violence on the days of election or just right after it. So it's really important that the police takes that into consideration while it's putting in place deploying its personnel to the Ondo State ahead of the elections. It's also important to to always caution politicians and parties around how they go about campaigning, because that can have a huge impact on the security environment for the elections.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Mark Amaza, Senior Media and Comms Officer for IAGA Africa. Thank you for joining us here on Newsday.